Hey everybody, guess what? It's time for another Galaxy Brain. I know it's been a very long time since I've done the show on this channel. We did it with Teamfight Tactics quite a bit, a little bit with World of Warcraft, and now with all the One Piece card gaming I've been doing, that I've been commentating and all that, I thought it was time to bring it back because we've got a lot of big brains in the collectible card game scene. Well, I should say trading card game scene. Back when I was like a kid, it was collectible. It was CCG. Now it's TCG. But I digress. We have one of the best here from One Piece. We have none other than Jackson Hoang, aka Clyde. Not only a national champion, but also a soon-to-be two-time world appearing player, not to mention all sorts of tops and other great finishes in other tournaments. Thanks so much for joining me. We're going to watch one of your games today, but first let's talk a little bit about you. Just a quick little interview thing for the few people who may not know who you are yet. You've been playing One Piece for a while, but I actually don't know. Is One Piece your first game, or did you come to it from something else?
No, actually, I came from Digimon, which is
Okay.
Bandai's, I guess, predecessor before One Piece. And I played that for like a year and a half, and then
Okay.
that's how I got introduced to One Piece because Bandai announced that they were releasing a new card game. So I figured it'd be nice to, play a card game where I can start from scratch and start on the even footing as everybody else. That's kind of the big reason why I never really picked up any of the older TCGs, just because I
Okay.
don't want to play catch up.
Oh, okay. So that was really like, it wasn't a big love of like the One Piece IP or something like that. It was just that you wanted to start from the ground floor with a new card game more than anything.
That too. I mean, I still love the One Piece card. IP as well. It's definitely one of my top like three animes. So
Okay.
I mean, it was just I guess a match made in heaven.
For sure. Who's your character of choice in the show?
I think either probably Ace or Zoro. Ace just more because I resonate with him a lot. Zoro is probably just he's just really cool. Probably the coolest character on the show. But
And
it's a hard toss up between those two.
I hear it. Well, I mean, I feel like you've already lasted longer in the TCG scene than Ace did in the show. So you're doing really good there. You're doing fine. But we're gonna watch a match today from last year's World Championship. So this was about almost a year ago now. It was March of 2024. This was against Rail Zero, or do you say Rail Zero or Rails? Because I know I've seen the name around and I've seen some of his games before, but I never heard his ID actually said out loud before. Do you
I
know?
think it's real zero
That's
because
what I thought. Yeah.
just because the last digit's a zero. So I think that's how he expects it to be pronounced. But I've heard rails as well too.
Okay,
But
good. We're both
yeah.
making assumptions here. That's a good start. But anyway, it's a Sakazuki mirror, which I know may come as a shock to a lot of people because you thought Sakazuki was off into the sunset, not necessarily riding off into the sunset, more ejected off into the sunset as he was banned right after this World Championships finished. But the mirror between Sakazuki players was a really, really fascinating matchup to watch. And although people kind of complained about it and all that, it really did have one of the highest levels of skill expression that we saw in the game, at least certainly since I started playing. I want to hear about it from your perspective, though, as we go into this game soon. What is it about the Sakazuki mirror in particular that was interesting to you?
Yeah, I think typically most people are right. It's probably really boring. Like it's very scripted. Like you just play the cards on curve, and then in the
Sure.
end game you just Rebecca Hinolucci. But I think this game in particular was like one of the most memorable, just because there's a lot of I guess weird lines I had to take that I normally wouldn't, just because of how my hand was, and then just a lot of back and forth. But other than that, yeah, I think a lot of the lines, like I had to make some less than optimal plays, but
Hmm.
still I think were like the best lines at the time. And that's why it's probably like, the one of the most memorable games of my career. Also because the stakes were very high. Like this was the last round of Swiss for Worlds, and I didn't
Hmm.
know if I would lose, if I would still make it to top cut. Spoiler: we both ended up making top cut anyway, but we didn't know that at the time.
Yeah, I mean, it ended up being a great game. I ended up casting the finals of that with Ying a little bit later, but it was. I mean, Sakazuki mirrors. You mentioned that it is kind of scripted and all that, but that was one of the reasons why I love this mirror so much. Is that you did have those very scripted, clearly strongest lines of play, but the cards in the deck, just the nature of the way Black and Blue interacted with the Sakazuki leader, led you to have the options to kind of like divert from the norm if you needed to. So it ended up being scripted, but very flexible too when it needed to be, which was kind of cool.
Right,
Yeah.
right, exactly.
All right. Well, you ready to jump in the game?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. And here we are, jumping right into the game. We're just watching this off the YouTube VOD. I will link it if you want to watch the entire thing in the description here. But yeah, playing against Rail Zero. And it looks like he ended up going first here, from what I can see. So as a player going second, that I feel like makes you feel pretty good right off the bat, right?
Right. I think I had the dice roll choice here as well, and I chose second. And in this mirror, like going second is like maybe 60% of the battle. Whoever gets to go second is super favored.
Mm-hmm.
And then going second, like I just want to mulligan for like the card you see there, which is brand new. And then Sakazuki, like the biggest thing about the deck is knowing what to discard, especially in the early game. A lot of stuff you discard can tend to bite you like in the butt later on if you discard the wrong thing and you find out you need something on curve.
Yeah, I mean
And then
this matchup almost feels like you're playing two hands at once, right? Which I guess is kind of like the black play style in general, but this more than anything at that time you had a lot of graveyard access with things like the Rebecca and all that.
yeah, and then you see like both of us starting out like pretty ideally. Like he started Hina on 3, I started brand new on 2.
Mm-hmm.
And then my answer here would probably be like a Borso on 4 as the answer. And then he has a scripted play as well. So here you kind of, if you know the mirror, you can kind of predict each other's play and still try to make the best play around it. But yeah, the early game is like pretty boring. But I'm glad that we both drew pretty well, like drew exactly what we wanted. Because if any of us missed any of the curves, it might have just been a blowout one way or the other. So I think since we both drew pretty optimally early, it ended up being a pretty close game.
Yeah, it's almost like, I mean, people use the term chess-like way too often, but it is chess-like in that a lot of the openings are kind of pre-scripted, right? Where you do one thing, you know what your opponent's going to do, and then once you sort of establish your openings, that's when things start to kind of deviate. But like you said, I mean, yeah, Borsalino on 4 after the brand new on 2, you're doing well, you're cooking, as the kids say. And you can see him using the Sakazuki ability right there. And so where in the game do you feel like you start to really see your first options to sort of deviate from that common line?
I guess right here is when he started to deviate. So since he
Yeah.
swung 5K, I knew that I couldn't really get punished off the 6K swing. Usually this play, ideally his turn would probably be like playing a Hina for 3 and then using Hound Blaze to bot deck my Borsalino before attacking. But since he attacked first, and like I give him so much respect as a player, that tells me that he didn't have that line. Otherwise, he wouldn't have attacked first. So that's why I saw that, okay, he's deviating. So now he's starting to play a little bit less optimally because of his hand. So I figured he was missing the Hound Blaze there because since he ditched a Hina off leader effect, he must have not had the Hound Blaze to pair with it. So I already went second, which is an advantage, and him having a pretty unoptimal turn 5 play is like another advantage to me here. So I'm starting to see like it deviate a little bit and start to ebb in my favor even more.
You know, in a high pressure situation like this too, I almost get afraid when I start to get ahead because it almost feels more difficult to stay ahead than to try to like catch up. You know, you're more worried about, oh, I better not mess up versus, okay, now how do I just keep up with them? Do you feel the same way? I've been in tournament finals enough times to feel that way. What do you think?
Yeah, and that's also the optics of being on the stream game too. Like,
Oh yeah.
there's like a million people watching, and if you're playing unoptimally, at least like 10% of them will know that you're playing unoptimally. So if you're ahead, then you're basically is your game to lose. If you're behind, and people expect you to lose anyway, so there's a lot less pressure. But yeah, I totally agree. Like there's a lot of pressure to keep doing well, keep being ahead when you're ahead. If you somehow throw it, then that's just worse than losing a game that you were meant to lose anyway.
Yeah, I get worried when I get ahead in games like this. But there's your Hound Blaze. Rip Hound Blaze, another card that is no longer with us in the game for now anyway.
I
Bottom
mean,
decking
still
that.
use. I see some people using Blue Doflamingo, but yeah, like you're not going to see much of it there.
Yeah.
But that brand new actually found me that Hamble, so luckily it was like the third card there, and I was able to remove his board pretty cleanly.
Okay. I'm getting a look at his trash there for a second. Yep. And
Yeah,
it's,
I was testing to see whether he had 2Ks or not because I could
okay.
either swing 6K 6K or 5K 7K.
Oh,
But I
okay.
decided just to swing 6K 6K just because I think I didn't see any 2Ks in trash yet.
Okay. Yeah, so I mean that's kind of a big part of it too. Is as you play the game more and more, you can kind of deduce a little bit what's in their hand by just looking at what's in their trash. It's so early in the game though. Do you feel like you really get a good read at it?
Yeah, I think at the time too, because we both basically knew each other's decks, so there were some cards that we knew were either like 1 or 2 ofs, like 2Ks. We know that we were each on like 7 or 8 2Ks at the time. Cards like Ice Age were a 2 of at the time, and even like stuff like Kaidos to see if we discarded any of them as well. So we can kind of predict what each other's hand might or might not have.
Now, I'm curious about the Borsalino here. Obviously, it gets a little bit harder to remove on your turn. That's just kind of the nature of the card, going up to 6K with it. But how much do you value keeping the Borsalino alive in this matchup?
In this matchup, any body that stays alive is just really strong. Just because back then the only way to remove 2 bodies for Sakazuki was Lucci, so you can only remove it by KO. So if Borsalino is one of the bodies you have that sticks, it's hard for them to remove 2 bodies if you're able to keep 1 body and then continue playing more body.
Yeah.
So if he had swung at it pretty hard and I could protect it for like 2 cards, maybe even 3 cards, I might have protected it there.
Okay.
But he had a pretty clean answer to it with the Borsalino on curve.
Right,
So
I was-
Borsalino actually.
Yeah, 7 cost Borsalino coming in, the blue Borsalino. The deck was running double Borsalinos back then. the blue and the black. But I guess if you do like a big Don swing at a rested Borsellino, then that kind of tells you that they probably don't have the cards in hand too. So that's almost like giving you more hand information in this setting.
Right, and then if they invest those Don as well,
Yeah.
means they're not playing anything really substantial as a body either. So yeah, I mean we both have pretty clean answers. He had 7 cost Borsellino on 7 Don. I had it on 8 Don paired with Great Eruption. So yeah, I think other than his 5 Don turn, this game went by pretty scripted. And like if you notice, both our hands, we both had 10 cost Kaido, which is the one interesting about this because I think 10 cost Kaido was really more of a Western preference. I know that people in the East tried it, but they didn't like it at all.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's been a while. Like the rusty Sakazuki gears are starting to turn in my brain again, and that sounds right. I don't remember seeing as many Kaidos over there. But then again, I was a little bit newer to the game during this meta too. I felt like I was just trying to keep up with all these, and the Sokka mirror was one that I feel like I really latched onto and been like, okay, I'm going to see a ton of these. This is really fascinating. I'm going to try to learn as much as I can about it. So it's fun to go back and check it out. So he's going to swing. It looks like did he put 6 on there? Yeah, I think it's just 1. Yeah, just 1 on there. All right, just testing the waters.
He has 8 Don left over, which telegraphs probably Rebecca Hina Lucci, or even just like a Great Eruption Borsellino.
Okay, yeah, there's Rebecca, so that kind of tells you exactly what's coming now. And so is it almost a relief in the mirror, or was it where you started to see the first person do their Rebecca Hina Lucci, where it's like, okay, that's one out of the way, and if they use their stuff before you use your stuff, I feel like that's generally an advantage for you in card games. Would you say that applies here?
I think like it's part of it's true. I think it's like the generalized statement is a little bit of a misconception. I think it's not whoever Rebecca Hinucci's first loses, it's whoever can't do it last. Usually those tend to go hand in hand. Like if you do it first, you're most likely going to do it last. But there are times where you can do it first and you're also the last one to do it. So I think it's less about who does it first and just whoever does it last.
Fair enough. All right, and so
you're like, I'm like sorting out my Dawn like in a kind of like a telegraph manner, telling him like I'm about to do Rebecca Hinucci myself as well. That's why I separate 4 Dawn in piles and then 2 Dawn for a potential Hellblaze. And like I kind of do that sometimes just to like tell my hand when I'm actually not planning to do that. Like I think the entire time I'm planning on doing 10 cost Kaido here. But like putting out your Dawn like this can like telegraph them into doing some weird stuff. Like I saw with the Hina there. I think if he knew I was playing 10 cost Kaido, he would protect it 100% of the time.
Yeah, and so this is the 10 cost Kaido, of course, that draws you some cards if your opponent has 3 less life. That was the one that was pretty popular back in the day. You don't really see this card all that often anymore, which I miss it. I like it. I was considering running a couple of them in Buggy, but that's a whole different story. But anyway, you get your first giant body on the board. A little bit tougher to remove sometimes, but you still have the blocker to worry about. That Rob Lucci is still sitting there, and that's a 6K body you kind of have to keep in the back of your mind. I want to go back to the Dawn telegraphing for a second, though, because that's something I feel like I don't see enough of in this game yet. Where, I mean, even as recent as like playing Shanks, like you leave 2 Dawn open, we don't necessarily need to, just to be like, hey, maybe I've got the Red Hawk, maybe I don't, you know? Do you feel like we should see more of this at the top level of One Piece?
Yeah, I know some people who do it as well, too. Like, like, some people mouth out loud, like, what they're going to do, like, 2, 4, Helmblaze, or whatever. They might not even have Helmblaze or something. I know I do it too. You kind of mix it in, and then sometimes I do it, and it's truthful. But yeah, it's like all these little mind games. Like most of the time they won't matter, but sometimes they will. Like I think in that example just now, like I think if I knew my opponent was gonna play Houndblaze and out in his position, I'll protect Hina because now I have 3 bodies that can swing at my life and punish me for tapping out on Dawn and not getting rid of any of my bodies.
Yeah, it's not a bad spot. One of my favorite things to do is to just when I have an answer to something that I know they're going to play, but I don't want them to know I have that, I usually just set my hand down and stare off into space and kind of look like I've checked out because I don't like my position in the game.
Right.
And that draws people in. I've noticed that. I don't know. We all have our little things we try to get people with in card games, but that's what I do. Go ahead.
Yeah. Oh no, I was gonna say yeah. And then like I think I remember I made a little funny joke about this, like, and you probably hear on stream about like us both having 10 cost Kaido. I was like, I said something like, "Oh, this would never happen in Japan. They hate this card." Or something. But it was a little friendly match between us as well because me and Hervoya talked to each other before the tournament. We hung out with each other, so we were like friends. So this was like high stakes, but we were also like pretty friendly as competitors.
I mean, that's one of the things that's just like beautiful about TCG competitions, that has just been that way since the beginning. Like I mean, this is gonna make me sound old, but I've been playing card game tournaments for like 25 plus years at this point, and everyone always has such good attitudes. Like everyone's just trying to play as well as they possibly can, and they're just chill, you know? It's hard competition, but you're still going to be a good person, right? So that's cool to hear.
Yeah.
A double
I
Hina
do
though.
think like I
Wow.
make a small misplay here.
Okay.
Like looking back on this, like I think I could have attached two down to the brand new swung 5K leader, which he has to counter
Oh
because
yeah,
there's no
yeah.
way he takes like a 8K attack, and then I would get one extra card out of it, and then I would be able to swing 8K at the Lucci, which he would probably let go. If he wants to defend it, it's still the same, 3 cards either way. But
Mm-hmm.
I think if I sequence it the other way, then I would have got 2 cards out of him at least,
Okay.
or
No,
one
I
card out
see
of
what you
him.
mean. Yeah. How often do you go back and watch your VODs to look for little inefficiencies like that?
All the time. I
Okay.
record for like online tournaments, my matches as well, and then I usually VOD review them as well. Also because like I have a channel and like I post my
Yeah.
replay sometimes with commentary, and it's just helpful just to see like what you could have done better. I'm a very much a kind of a watcher when it comes to learning. I'm not much of a player. Like I watch other people's contents and I watch games and then just try to see what I can absorb from it rather than playing myself. And I think it's also a really good way to help yourself from getting burned out too easily.
I think that's a good lesson. I've always said if you ever want to be truly good at a card game, you have to go back and review your games. You have to just record it, find those inefficiencies, because otherwise you're just gonna kind of ingrain bad habits. Is really what I found happens if you don't go back and review your games. Not everyone has access to the tripod and the camera to do that, but if you do, you definitely should. So another brand new here. Are you feeling pretty good about your board position? You're at one life. So things are a little bit tense, but overall, I think you're looking a little bit better on board. What do you think?
Yeah, just because I realized that he probably can't answer like he's definitely not answering all 3 bodies. I don't think it was really possible back then to answer all 3 bodies unless he had some combination of ice ages, which is
Yeah.
really hard to do. So I knew that at least one body was surviving, but I had to take that second life, which I don't normally like to do because I didn't have any good plays going next. So I was trying to fish for something out of life so I can do Rebecca Hinaluchi back. He had a pretty like standard turn where he just did brand new Rebecca Hinaluchi, but
Hmm.
my hand was missing the pieces, so I didn't have that going back at him.
So now we get to the point of the game where I think you were talking about some of the more interesting lines are really starting to emerge here. So take me through that, right? When you're in this position, how do you what's the thought process with starting to make those sort of changes to the standard lines of play?
Yeah, I think the first thing is that like have I been in this position before, and then try to see if I can go through the history books and see if there's a play that I like here. I remember during this game actually I took a lot of lines that I never really took before, but one of the things I like pride myself on as a player is like being very flexible and coming up with some unique lines in the scenarios. Just because I don't think anybody has played through every exact scenario, so you're gonna need to be a little bit flexible during some games, and then try to like work your way through them. And then here's a first example here where I have both Rebecca's, but I don't have Hina or Lucci. Sometimes I can't do the Rebecca Hina Lucci combo. I think throughout this game you'll see some like weird like that's why I do some like great eruption here. Basically just not to do anything. I'm trying to fish for those pieces as well. So like you're already starting to see some inefficiencies on my side because I don't have the Rebecca Hina Lucci combo to combo him back, which is usually your strongest play in the late game as Sakazuki.
Right. I mean, you're kind of in survival mode at this point now. And I always thought one of the most interesting things about this matchup is that you do get in these board situations where it's relatively low health on both sides, but you both still have relatively large hand sizes, which presents kind of a difficult challenge for where and what to attack, right? Do you find it, did you find it really, really difficult in this matchup to kind of gauge how much counter they had access to?
Yeah, I think one thing with that is that when you're at 2 life, you feel pretty safe about it. But then when
Hmm.
you have your opponent to 1 life, like he has me here, you can start kind of trying to whittle down my hand and eventually go for a Hound Blaze lethal. I think being at 1 life is extremely risky because now you have to be greedier with your defenses. Like if he ever swings 7K and I don't have a blocker, I have to counter out of that. Whereas if I swung 7K as 2 life, he can just take it because he still has that 1 life buffer. But being at 1 life versus 2 is very like it's very different here. So he has to just whittle down my hand, and eventually he can go for lethal. And I had to make sure he takes that second life before I do the same to him. And here you say instead of Rebecca Hinaluchi, I can do Rebecca Suriluchi, which is
Yeah.
definitely a worse version of it. But I mean, it could be worse where I just can't KO anything at all.
Yeah, I mean, at least you do get the ability to minus cost and get rid of it. It must feel really bad to have one of your 2Ks sitting on the board like that instead of being in your hand. And that is kind of almost tipping your hand a little bit to him too, that you don't necessarily have the standard efficient ways to deal with things. So he knows that maybe there's blood in the water a little bit here. And I'm trying to remember what was in your hand right now. You've still got a Rebecca. You've still got a couple Tashigis, right? What else was in your hand at this point?
I think it was a bunch of 2Ks,
Okay.
maybe some Hound Blazes, but
Yeah.
I think I'm missing any of the good pieces, like any Hinas, any Luchis, or even Mansherries. Manchery
Oh,
at this
yeah.
point in the game, it would be really nice as well, just because it's basically an extra copy of any piece you're missing, and I'm missing. So 2Ks aren't really that useful here. It's only useful as like a finishing piece when you want to bait your opponent going to lethal. But this game is going to be so drawn out that 2Ks don't really matter here.
Yeah, I mean, that said, your hand size is dwindling now, right? Just like you said, you had to start giving up some stuff because, you're low on life. You don't necessarily want to commit the Rebecca just yet. So it's, I would imagine you're starting to sweat a little bit, being only on, 6 cards in hand versus his, it looks like 8 at this point, 9? Yeah, there's a Manchuri.
And he does see Manchuri.
Yeah.
So like his last 2 turns have been really good. He did Rebecca Hinaluchi twice basically, and he gets a power with a Manchuri.
Wow.
And the reason that I defended my life there with the counter instead of Rebecca is because I was hoping that I can have 2 blockers set up and I can be even greedier with my swings. Like I can start swinging without playing a blocker for a turn because I still have 1 setup from last turn. And that's really the biggest reason why I defended it there.
Yeah, I mean, at this point in the game too, when you find yourself behind, you kind of have to be greedy, don't you, a little bit?
Yeah, exactly. Or you try to have some little foresight into the future about like what you can do if you like make a play now. And then, like I said, having a Rebecca setup means next turn I necessarily don't have to bring a Rebecca. I can do something like 7-cost Borsellino and Houndblaze to get rid of his board instead, and I don't have to worry about him taking my last life.
Right. So at this point, Rebecca's out there, Kaido's still out there. I feel like this Kaido kind of ended up being your saving grace this game. Just getting that out there a little bit earlier and having it like live really has sort of like paid dividends.
Right. You see one person having a Kaido that sticks and the other person doesn't. Usually the person with Kaido should be blowing the person out if
Right.
they draw well the rest of the game, like equally well. But my draw off the Kaido was pretty bad. It was just a bunch of 2Ks, not really pieces. But I do draw Lucci here, so I can do my first Rebecca Hina Lucci of the game, which is like basically my 7th turn right now. Whereas I think this is like his 3rd Rebecca Hina Lucci, which is helping him come back into the game.
That's kind of crazy. On a side note, I see you're 3-1 in the tournament. What was the one loss at this point?
It was actually Guanrong. We both lost to Guanrong. So we had hopes that no matter who lost here would still make it because Guanrong was the only undefeated at the time. But we didn't want to risk it then because 1x2, I believe, made it at the time unless the Paradown lost. And the Paradown did end up losing. So 2x2s ended up making, and we both ended up making it. But yeah, we both lost to Guanrong, I think, back to back. I think I lost to him round 3 and he lost to him round 2.
Scary guy.
Yeah.
And going in on the Manchuri, why not? Yeah.
Yeah.
Now that
this
is
one of the
unorthodox
weird plays.
a little bit.
Yeah, this is one of the weird plays.
Yeah.
It's still not like the best, but I think that given my board and his board state, I think this was the best play I had. And then I think him letting it go might have been a mistake as well.
Okay. Why's that?
Just because if he blocks here, it's going to stick for the next turn, most likely, unless I want to swing my Kaido over it. And if I swing my Kaido over it, then it's basically the same thing as well.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah, and I guess this isn't that bad a mistake, but if I swung on my Rebecca, I don't really care about keeping my Rebecca alive anyway. If that Kaido swings over my Hina, it would be the same thing, but or at least maybe it would have countered out just because I think leaving that Manchuri alive gives him so much advantage. So maybe even just countering out would have been nice.
And so he's really trying to decide what to do about your Kaido swing right now. And deciding if he wants to take the life, deciding if he wants to commit the Rebecca. You're not going to counter out of this. What were you hoping he would do in this situation?
I'm hoping he would block Rebecca.
Yeah.
Because if he blocks his Rebecca, then that means his Rebecca can't swing over my Rebecca. So that's the one play
right.
that I was the most worried about swinging my Rebecca is that we get in these kind of Rebecca
Oh, that's
wars
big.
where we would always leave one standing, but the other ones can swing over the other one.
And that was huge right there. I mean, you were able to get rid of the Manchuri. You were able to then reduce him to a single Rebecca on the board. Your Rebecca swing makes a lot more sense now with your second Rebecca coming down. Maybe he predicted this, but he wasn't really in a position to let that Rebecca go. So he kind of had to just take that life, right? But now suddenly things swing way back in your favor, I feel like.
Yeah, I also think taking that life isn't bad too, because if he finds something that he needs there, it would be a great life. And I don't think he's at risk of dying anyway, since he kept that blocker up. He'll most likely have 2 blockers at all times. And that really only gets punished if I have like double Houndblaze and double Eruption, which is pretty hard to do considering I think I used 2 already.
Yeah, I mean, having a double blocker up in this matchup, on a like scale of 1 to 10, what would you rate that as as far as getting you towards winning it?
I think when you're at 1 life, I think double blocker is a really nice to have, honestly. Like
Yeah.
it's not really necessary, but it lets you do more greedy things. Like I mentioned here, since I kept Rebecca alive from last turn, I was able to greedily swing it this turn because I was playing another Rebecca blocker here. So you gotta kind of take as much ground as you can by making these greedy plays.
Yeah, fair enough. I keep going back to that Kaido, just having that access to that swing every turn. I'm just looking at this, and it's a little bit harder to spot, but it's putting a lot of pressure on him.
Right. And here I'm just clearing up board space. I'm just gonna block Rebecca, and he gets a second man sherry, which is like
Wow.
it's pretty brutal to watch, just
Yeah.
because like if I had just one man sherry, it would kind of help me come back into the game. But his like late game turns have been really good, and it's really helping him come back into the game when he's staring down a 10 cost Kaido.
Right. So now again, you know a little bit of what he has access to, but what he has access to is more blockers, right? He's got a ton on the field right now.
Yeah, more blockers and a pseudo blocker, because now I had to swing over that man sherry as well.
Right. I mean, that's a big thing to think about. I think one of the core components to One Piece, in my opinion, is just what are the pseudo blockers, right? How can you position stuff on your board to be that thing they need to swing onto from time to time when you need it?
Yeah. And then one thing he didn't do is swing over my Rebecca with his Rebecca, just because if he does, he leaves one blocker up, and he's at threat of dying to a Hound Blaze.
Right.
Great Eruption. I'm not sure if he had enough counter at the hand at the time, but if he did have enough counter, which I think would just be 4 2Ks, then you can take that greedy swing and then bait me to go all in. I'm not sure what his hand looks like, but I think he has like 6 cards. So I'm assuming he has at least 7 counters with how much he's been filtering. Actually, I see his hand only has 2 2Ks, so and then 1K. So he only had 5K counter, which makes sense why he didn't swing at the Rebecca. He really needs 2 blockers in order to get around any kind of Hound Blaze shenanigans. But I did my one job, my first step to winning, which is get his second life, and now force him to play even more defensively because I have a pretty strong lethal if he only has 1 blocker.
Right. So, head and hands, what is the decision you're thinking about right now?
Yeah, this is another one of those turns where I can't just Rebecca Hinaluchi. I have to think of like some kind of weird turn where I can try to extract as much value out of my board and KO as much of his board as possible.
Yeah.
So I had a really weird turn as well, and like I said before, like you get put in these scenarios where you never really come across it in practice, and then you have to kind of figure out the puzzle when you actually play it.
And so, what does swinging the Kaido then do for you here? What is the type of pressure you're trying to exert with that?
Yeah, I swing.
get a
I swing
blocker,
the
right?
swinging the Kaido, no matter what, it gets
Yeah.
blocked no matter what. So this is the
Yeah.
least amount of information I'm giving away by swinging with it and not doing anything with my Don. And I assume it's gonna get blocked anyway. So if I swung at Hina, he would have blocked it. If I swung at his life, he would have blocked it. So it didn't matter where I swung it. I just want to get that out of the way. Also because we were running pretty low on time, and
Oh,
in
yeah.
the Asia/Japan rules, if you both go into time, then it's a double loss.
Yeah, they have that in Star Wars Unlimited too, where I'm playing in a lot of
Oh, wow.
tournaments, and it is rough. You don't
Yeah,
want to play
so I'm
those
still
mega
thinking-
control decks, so yeah, you definitely thinking about time too. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm like a super hard think here, just because I knew that I was gonna make some weird play, so I wanted to make sure that it made sense in my head before I do it, and like, kind of ridiculous if it didn't end up working.
So you swing at the Hina. It looks like he 2K'd out of that with the Tashigi, and so now you've still got all your Don up. You've got an interesting hand here. I mean, let's see. Okay, so there's a Hound Blaze. Yep.
This Rebecca's just putting in work. Like I think the
Yeah.
biggest takeaway people got from watching this game is blockers aren't just blockers. Like you can swing at them, but I was able to get rid of his Hina that way, and I think this actually is a reverse of last turn where he should have blocked. This time he should not have blocked because now I get an easy clear. He couldn't have known that I didn't have Rebecca Hinaluchi, but in case I didn't, I would not be able to remove both his Rebecca and his Lucci. But since he was able to give me the 4 cost Rebecca and leave the 1 cost Mancherry, I was able to remove it pretty easily. So I think, yeah, this is the reverse of the last turn where he should have let it go instead of blocking it.
I mean, it feels like that was kind of the pivotal turn in this game. I haven't watched this game yet, so I don't know exactly how it ends. But to me, that turn right there seems like kind of the nail in the coffin, rather, the final nail in the coffin, or at least the beginning of nailing the coffin closed.
I think it's hard to say just because
Yeah?
that
Okay.
turn costs a lot of resources from my hand, so he still has like a good lethal himself. Like if he wants to go for lethal here, he can swing like 8 or 9, and maybe like steal game that way because I have no blockers up and he can boost his power of Hound Blaze as well. But that was
Sure.
such an inefficient turn for me. It costed a lot of cards on my hand. I only have 3 left. But like I said before, when you get down to 1 life, you gotta try to whittle each other's hands down so that way you can go for a Hound Blaze lethal.
Yeah. Yeah, you don't want to take any chances, because if you go for lethal and you miss, then you just die, usually, in most games of One Piece. Rebecca Hinaluchi from him again.
Yeah, I think there's like the 3rd in a row.
Yeah.
Or maybe like the 4th in a row.
I think 4th total, maybe, yeah.
Yeah, and then now I know like this is probably my last turn just because I have no more
Mhm.
Rebecca's. I can't play any more blockers, so I have to figure out some kind of lethal. And I'll cover my cards here a little bit, but I did have a lethal where I just do Lucci and swing 10k, 12k, which
Oh
I
yeah.
think might have gotten there anyway. But I was exploring my options because there was another option where I can just play a blocker and hope I survive. But that just gets punished by Hound Blaze as well.
Right. I think it's one of the things where you have to play to win and not play to not
Exactly.
lose, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Exactly. That's one of my favorite things as well.
Oh
And
yeah.
yeah, I ended up drawing a Hound Blaze here, and I think it's pretty. With 4 cards in hand, it's not confirmed, but he would need exactly 4 2Ks to get out of it, I believe.
Yeah, the odds are in
Maybe.
your favor. Yep, as you Suru and then yep, Hound Blaze.
Oh no,
Okay.
he actually, yeah, I think it's 13, 14, so he would need a 2K out of life and the rest of hands to be 2Ks. Yeah, so that join the Hound Blaze is like really cool and climactic, but I think I had a lethal anyway with Cyrilucci, but just seeing the Hound Blaze there in my hand, I get a little bit like jumpy here just because I think I have lethal.
Yeah, I think you're right. And you Josiane, that's it. All right. Yeah, sick game. And that is one of the things I just love about the Sokka mirror is that it's not over till it's over, but knowing how to navigate through that, knowing how to just use, kind of squeeze every little bit of value out of your resources is huge. But let's go back to the other screen here. With One Piece, it really feels to me like there's a lot of times where you really have to play the averages to go for lethal, right? Very few times, in my opinion, again, as an inferior player, as someone who is still, I would say, very much learning the game, I feel like a lot of times it's very rare when you're like, I have lethal, I'm winning this game, and it's much more likely based on the amount of cards in their hand, what's in their trash, I can make the assumption that I can probably win, and I kind of need to here because I'm going to lose soon if I don't. Is that in most games for you at the pro level, or do you find you're a lot more sure when you're about to finish something out?
I think there's no such thing as a sure win. Like with triggers and like your opponent's hand being something, like most of the times you're going for most likely wins. Like
Mm-hmm.
I most likely win this unless he has this exact combination of cards or his life is exactly not this. So it's very rare that I get a sure win. But yeah, I like what you said earlier, where it's just you play to win the game and you don't play not to lose. Like there's so many times where people they have a lethal angle and they just don't go for it, and like maybe 9 out of 10 times it doesn't work, but you just need it be that one time for it to be worth it. Whereas if you just play to lose, you might lose like 10 out of 10 times.
Yeah, yeah. When you're playing to just stay alive, when you think about it, you're really not getting any closer to finishing the game. You're just sort of extending it and running yourself out of resources. You're kind of just slowly draining yourself dry, right? Where I mean, it's a principle that applies to any card game out there, and I've run into it in a lot of card games I played over the years. But knowing when to do that in One Piece, like when you're in that situation, is so hard. Like honestly, I have an enormous amount of respect for the top One Piece players now. And I will admit, I didn't respect this game like I should have when I started casting it, when I started playing it. I did not realize the level of depth that existed in the game. And I've just been like mega humbled by it, where I'm like, I'm used to being able to come in and like be good at a card game fairly quickly. And like, that has not happened with One Piece. I have tried, and this game is hard. So I appreciate the insight. I really appreciate you sitting down and talking to me. And hopefully I learned a lot. I know other people out there have hopefully learned a lot too. Before we go, do you have any closing thoughts about that game, about things in general? Shout out what you're working on right now. The floor is yours.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I am like starting to try to become a content creator with a YouTube channel. I think my YouTube is YouTube at Clyde TCG that I'm working on with
We'll put it in
Jonas.
the description. Yeah.
Yeah. That who was the other North American representative and is probably one of the best players I know. I have a Patreon as well, with it's just patreon.com/ClydeTCG. Twitter is just the same, ClydeTCG. But yeah, I'd like to thank you for having me on here. I appreciate like having you cast the games. Like I grew up watching a lot of your casting, so it's really a
Oh,
surreal
thank you.
feeling
My pleasure.
to have you cast as well. And yeah, I love the channel and I love the series and hope that more good can come out of it.
Yeah, well, thanks for being my first One Piece guest on this version of Galaxy Brain. Again, I learned a ton. It was really fun to go back and revisit a Sakazuki mirror because, like I said, that was the first matchup that really got me and being like, wow, this game is awesome. So I appreciate it. It was great. Hopefully you all enjoyed it out there too. Check out Clyde's stuff as well. Links again down in the description, and we'll see you next time. Thanks a lot.